For Art 351 by Abigail Chen, entitled Misty and Mystical, a reflection on beauty and on being in Christ, with emphasis on the Merton Anthology, Part 6. I'd like to open with a Merton quote that I thought was very relevant to my examination of East and West coming together, which was at the introduction of this section of emphasis because of the last 2 months of Merton's life, which he spent in the Far East traveling from Bangkok to Calcutta to New Delhi and then back to Bangkok after a couple other cities, where his journey was cut short by his tragic death in December 1968. For Merton, to be in Christ was to be united, and the author of the anthology notes mystically, yes, but also politically, economically, with all humankind. And this quote that I'm going to present from him, I'll bring in conversation with his art piece and an additional piece that I thought really brought an emphasis of the mysticality, but also the unity of humankind. Begins here. To be a Christian, then, not only to believe in Christ, but to live in Christ, and in a mysterious way to become united in Christ. This is both Christian life and Christian holiness. Earlier in the introduction, it also includes a section of Merton where he writes, "The more we are united to Christ in love, the more we are united in love to one another." And this Asian journey enabled Merton to see something more of what these words might have meant. And so I chose one of the 3 images that were included in this anthology to examine his perspective on this. The one included is on page 129, and the first words describing it were small circles of light. And you can definitely see that descriptive imagery and sense of title, although it was untitled in this piece. You can also see the vibrancy and the energy that is exuded from each of these circles, but also the uniqueness in each of them and as they united together to create this piece. I bring it in conversation and was inspired by the account of his Far East travels with a piece that I saw as I walked into Gallery 109 at the Art Institute back in September of 2019. When you entered the room, you saw 16 Pillars of Tadao Ando, a Japanese artist, and featured from August 10th to November 10th of 2019 was an exhibition entitled Expressive Ink, Paintings by Yang Yamping and Zheng Shangqing. This is a picture I took of my friend who is my Art Institute visiting buddy at the time, and we are taking a glimpse at the pieces featured in this exhibit, but I also wanted to focus on the look of not just the 16 embodied pillars, which I wasn't able to include a picture here of. You would have to just go see it for yourself, but also the sense of emphasis of light and dark in this room, and the emphasis on the images that are a decent size and the pairings of them as well. In addition to the lack of wordy descriptions, definitely not on these walls, and I, based on my memory, don't have much by way of description of this exhibition or gallery. So I looked up the artist and this exhibition, and in the article online at the Art Institute's website, noted that this artist, she was born in 1934, her and her husband, who they co-led this exhibition, they were both co-featured, and the description writes that Yang Yamping and her husband belonged to a generation of Chinese artists whose early careers were stifled by the Cultural Revolution of Mao Zedong. From 1949 through the late 1970s, the People's Republic of China regulated the lives and work of its artists, limiting their expression and shutting out international influences. As these policies were loosened, Yang and Zheng were able to practice their art freely in China, winning acclaim before moving to the United States in 1986. And throughout the 80s, Yang developed a unique style rooted in traditional Chinese painting, but indisputably modern. And we can see this with the piece that I am going to be putting in conversation with Merton, which is entitled In Fog, produced in 2018. Interestingly, I looked up this image and couldn't find much more information on it specifically. The description on the Art Institute's website of this guest exhibition did not include a quality picture. As you can tell, this is one from my own camera. And what's interesting is some of her style features a wiry ink line speckled with tiny dots, executed with pen rather than brush, depicting her favorite themes, lotuses and landscapes. Yang's contrasting washes, often incandescent in hue, bleed into each other, dissolving these subjects into abstract nebulas of color. And we can't really see the nebulas of color here. You can see the accents of red at the top of the more amorphous shapes in black ink. What's interesting to me is that you aren't necessarily sure which is the fog. Is it the more cloudy, gray, light colored pieces of clouds, it seems like, at the top right and the top left, extending to the bottom? Or is it actually those black, big, foggy looking clouds? Or does that symbolize sort of the sense of the meaning of the land and the sky and the fog as it rolled in there? So it's really interesting to tend to look for the landscape aspect to this painting, but also definitely feel some of the traditional Chinese calligraphical accents of this ink style. I found a little bit more about the artist in the North American Women's Artists of the 20th Century, a biographical dictionary edited by Jules Heller and Nancy Heller. And the insert on Yang noted that, quote, like the scholar painters of 11th century China, Yang maintains that the purpose of painting is to express the mind of the artist and not to formally represent the natural world. So you can see the expression of her mind in this piece, but also in the integration and the allusions to the natural world. In terms of style, I also read on Art Asia Pacific that it was not until after she arrived in the US that she fleshed out her signature aesthetic, blending classical Chinese ink painting with neo impressionism, as well as the gestural style of her Western contemporaries. This was her unique style starting in the 1980s, but contends all the way till now. And I'd also like to bring in a feature piece that I enjoyed. It was right to the left of this painting that I saw, and it exemplifies some of the incandescent hue that was referenced earlier and her style, just to give us a little bit more context. And that is Autumn Song in 2018. If you can just sit with it and take a look at it, I think it's quite beautiful, and the way that the colors blend and bleed into one another, but also are distinct, as well as the way the wiry ink lines bring form and shape to the images, but also implies a sense of building out of a diversity of color, diversity of shapes, and the ways that they blend with one another. Now we are going to move to just compare and contrast Merton with Yang's work that I featured. And in conclusion, looking at the misty and the mystical and the unity and the being of Christ, I thought it was really interesting that one of the galleries that most often featured Yang's work, and I believe features her work now, is the Michael Goldhaus Gallery in New York. And a biographical description on the website of her includes this excerpt. Yang is well versed in many traditional styles, but has excelled in depicting the lotus flower, a symbol of purity, transience, the fragility of nature, and the potential for regeneration. And while this piece in particular doesn't display a lotus flower, I think the sense of purity, of transience, the fragility of nature, and the potential for regeneration are all included in her work. And in contrasting that and comparing it with Merton's piece to the left, of the small circles of light under the banner of being in Christ and the unity thereof, as well as his personal interactions of East and West, really brought me inspiration in comparing these two images. I also see the potential for regeneration in what it means to have life in Christ, what it means to be united as humankind, as referenced earlier, as well as the selections of the anthology that really brought a, a thinking that emphasizes the ways in which we can see Christ in one another and how our behaviors here on earth in the present moment does indeed influence what it means to be united with Christ eternally. Thanks for watching my presentation.